Dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack and flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yep, what's good, original crew, man? We're back. Hey, man, we got ballin' in the building today. We got true glitches in the Matrix. With that being said, before we get into it, make sure y'all check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go. If you want to first support, all you got to do is check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's video,
lock it in with a thumbs up.
Hey, let's get it. Let's check this out. Let's see what's about. You ready?
I'm ready.
Today, I'm going to share 3 stories that really should never have happened. Like, the things that happen in these stories feel impossible. They defy everything we know about mathematics and probability, but they are all completely true, which proves to all of us that extraordinary, truly improbable events can happen at any moment. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, the next time you're at the Like Button's house, go ahead and secretly switch out their spray-on deodorant for hairspray. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. Around noon on October 21st, 1988, a man named Valentino sat at a cafe table sipping a coffee on a sidewalk in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So this particular neighborhood was called Caballito, and it was right in the heart of Buenos Aires. It was very densely populated, and there were lots of tall apartment buildings and shops and cafes with tons of pedestrians and tons of traffic. And so as a result, it often felt very loud and chaotic, and today was no different. But Valentino, despite the craziness all around him, he still wanted to try to find a moment of peace as he had his coffee. And so he sort of sat back in his chair and he just looked up at the sky above all the urban noise, and he took this deep, calming breath. And as he did this, he saw a few birds fly by, and he just kind of smiled to himself, watching them fly on. But then he saw something else. Out of the corner of his eye, just across the street, he saw a flash of something brown plummeting towards the ground in front of a tall apartment building. And so Valentino turned his attention to look and see what this thing was. But what he saw didn't make any sense. There was this one old woman on the other side of the street who had stopped on the sidewalk, and she was staring down at what appeared to be like a pile of clothes at her feet. And the brown thing, the thing that caught Valentino's attention, which he couldn't make out what it was just a few feet away from this pile in front of this woman. But then this old woman across the street, she just began screaming. And that's when Valentino realized that what he thought was like a pile of clothes at her feet was actually like a person, like a heap of a person on the ground. It was another old woman, and she was completely motionless on the ground. And so Valentino, he's shocked by what he's seeing. He's trying to make sense of it, and he's seeing again now, knowing it's a person on the ground and seeing this brown thing over here, and he's thinking, was that flash of brown, like that brown thing falling and striking this woman who's now motionless on the ground? Is that what happened? And as Valentino is sort of coming up with theories about what he's even looking at, it seemed like at the same time, the entire bustling neighborhood all around him also, just for a moment, stopped and just sort of paid attention to whatever madness was happening over there, as they too were trying to piece together what happened. But then, that brief moment of almost relative calm just completely dissipated, and the street once again descended into total chaos. Passerby and locals started shouting and racing over to the woman on the ground to help her, and very quickly this woman and the other woman who was screaming was completely surrounded by this huge crowd. And Valentino, for his part, he felt very shaken by what he was seeing, and just thinking about the fact that he might have seen effectively this woman get destroyed by whatever this brown thing was. He did see that flash of brown, and so he's sort of traumatized, and he's also, he's thinking he doesn't want to contribute to the the pandemonium over there by running over to join the massive throng of people trying to figure out what happened. And so instead, he just stayed at his cafe table, with his coffee, and just watched as this crowd continued to build across the road. Finally, Valentino heard sirens, and he knew that meant an ambulance had to be close. But for some reason, even though he knew that was like objectively a good thing, help was on the way, maybe they can save this woman on the ground, he doesn't know. Even though he felt like he should feel relieved now that professionals are gonna show up, they're gonna clear the crowd, they're gonna handle this, he just couldn't calm down. Like he literally couldn't stop. Like his heart was racing, his pulse was racing, his stomach was in knots. I mean, he felt terrible. It was like he was completely reliving this trauma that he's just experienced over and over and over again. As soon as the ambulance came into view and parked, the mass of people saw them and right away parted to let the paramedics come through to try to help this woman. And Valentino, from across the road, he was craning his neck to try and see, what was happening. And as he did, he saw this middle-aged woman who he didn't know crossing the street in the direction of this scene over there. And she just looked like she was just curious. And as she's crossing the road, she got destroyed by a city bus. It plowed directly into her, and she immediately disappeared underneath the bus's wheels. And so Valentino, whose heart was already basically beating out of his chest, he was so upset about everything, he shot to his feet like, what is going on here? Screams erupted from all around him, from other people who had seen the same horrible thing. And he could feel his heart just like racing nonstop, and sweat began dripping down his back. He was almost dizzy with shock, and he began to stagger away from his table, looking frantically around, calling out for somebody to actually help him. Like it was like his body couldn't handle what he was seeing. But nobody came because there were so many other things happening, horrible things that demanded immediate attention from other people that no one's paying attention to Valentino having, a panic attack here. Like he's so low on the priority list. And so as he's sort of fumbling around the cafe, trying to get someone to help calm him down, nobody's paying attention to him. And so eventually Valentino kind of spiraled and then fell to the ground, and he found himself once more, on his back on the ground, staring up at the sky, watching birds fly across. What actually happened on that street in 1988 in Buenos Aires was so improbable that it made newspapers all across the world. So the first woman who was hit by the object that fell from the sky, the flash of brown, she died from the impact. And then that woman, the middle-aged woman who crossed the road to see what was going on, who got hit by the bus, she also died. And Valentino, who witnessed this entire thing, was so stunned and so horrified that he actually had a heart attack. And then he died on his way to the hospital. And so basically, these three fatalities that all occurred within minutes of each other were all connected, but were basically freak accidents that all had to happen in succession to even occur. And it all started when that brown thing plummeted through the air, the thing that caught Valentino's eye. And it would turn out that brownish object was actually the fourth victim in this tragedy. That object was actually a poodle named Khaki that had chased a ball straight off the balcony of its owner's 13th floor apartment.
Wow.
Oh.
All because chasing a ball off a balcony and jumped up. What the fuck? And it caused so much chaos.
So much.
Wow. And people went in a panic frenzy because they don't know what the
Yeah.
Wow. And that's the reason why Valentino died. You talking about crazy scenes?
At 3 a.m. on Sunday, December 24th, 1967, 26-year-old Sammy Brown Jr. sped in his car down a road called Seal Road in Phoenix City, Alabama, with a police siren blaring right behind him. So Sammy was in trouble. It was Christmas Eve, and he had celebrated a little too hard and drank way too much, and he thought he'd be okay to drive home since he lived close by, but he'd been wrong, and he'd ultimately attracted the attention of a police officer who was now chasing him. And Sammy knew he could not get caught because in addition to being very drunk, He also didn't even have a license to drive in the first place. And so that's why right now he was driving at 100 miles an hour to get away from this cop. But not only was the cop actually gaining on him, but also Sammy could see on the road up ahead that he had another problem. Because there was another car in front of him driving in the same direction, and because this other car was actually going the speed limit, Sammy was going to smash into them if he didn't swerve around them. But this was not a highway where Sammy could just easily change lanes. It was a local 2-lane road. So Sammy knew that if he wanted to swerve around this car, he would have to swerve into the oncoming traffic lane. But since Sammy kind of looked and didn't see any other cars in that lane, he just decided to go for it and pray that he got lucky. So Sammy cut his wheel and tried to swerve around the slower car. But again, Sammy is extremely drunk. He's being chased by this cop who's gaining on him, so his anxiety is spiking. He's going so fast. And in this state of mind, Sammy actually misjudged the timing of his swerve, and he clipped the back of the slower car. And as soon as he did, there was this crunch of metal, and both cars began to spin out across the road before they sort of miraculously just came to a stop. Inside of his own car, Sammy sort of sat up and looked around and realized he was unhurt. And then when he looked out the window, he could see the driver of the other car, a man in his 60s, slowly get out and walk to his bumper to inspect the damage. And when Sammy saw this, he realized that despite how bad of a situation he was in, he actually had gotten very lucky. I mean, not only was he alive, but the man he had just hit going nearly 100 miles an hour also appeared to not just be alive, but basically seemed okay. Following the crash, Sammy expected to have some pretty harsh consequences. And he was charged for reckless driving and also driving without a license. But, sort of amazingly, his lucky streak actually would continue because despite the charges, he didn't actually have to serve any jail time. He just had to pay a couple of fines, which meant Sammy really did not learn his lesson. And so over a year later, on April 13th, 1969, Sammy once again spent all of his Saturday night drinking, and then at about 1:30 a.m. on Sunday morning, he got into that same car, which he still did not have a license to drive, and then he once again sped down Seal Road, the same road he got arrested on last December. And wouldn't you know it, just like the last time, he saw a car ahead of him in his lane going too slow, and he decided to go around it. This time, however, he was not being chased by police, so he was not nearly as frantic or anxious. So he began shifting lanes much further away from this slower car. And when he moved into the opposing traffic lane, because of the distance he had given himself, he didn't clip the car in front of him. And for a split second, he felt an intense rush of satisfaction, because this was just more proof to Sammy that he was just an incredibly lucky guy. However, before Sammy could drive his car back into the correct lane, he went around a curve in the road and was immediately blinded by a searing bright light. Then there was a deafening bang, and Sammy's car jerked to the side, and all he saw was a violent swirl of motion as his car again spun around and then finally came to a stop. For a few moments, Sammy just sat there, feeling completely stunned. I mean, again, he's gotten into a high-speed wreck, and he's sort of taking stock of, did he even survive? But after a few moments, he realized he definitely had lived. His neck ached quite a bit from being shaken so hard, but other than that, he kind of looked around and he realized once again he was basically unhurt. So he had just gotten really lucky again. And so eventually he climbed out of his car, and even though he was sort of dizzy from the crash, from the alcohol, when he took stock of what was in front of him, he could immediately see what had just happened. In his effort to avoid hitting the car that was driving in the same lane as him, he had swerved into oncoming traffic and hit a different car, another car, head on, that was driving in the opposite direction. This was like a worst case scenario. And both his car and the one he had hit were completely destroyed, with the fronts completely smashed in. It was truly a miracle Sammy had walked out of that car. And so Sammy, he staggered over to look at the other car and see if the other driver and, potential passengers were okay. When he staggered over there, when he looked inside of the wreckage, he could not believe what he saw. because what he saw inside was yet another miraculous stroke of luck. Only this time, it was not the good kind. Sammy had somehow managed to do something that really should have been impossible. He had almost perfectly recreated the accident that he had had a year earlier. He was driving the same car, going down the same road on the same day of the week, and he had crashed for basically the exact same reasons. And then when Sammy looked inside of the car he hit head on, he realized there was one more truly just incredible coincidence. The driver of this car was the same driver as the car he hit a year earlier. The man's name was Francis Patterson. He was 65 years old, and he didn't even live in Phoenix City where this crash happened. It was just a wild coincidence that 2 times more than a year apart, Sammy had hit him while driving drunk on Seal Road. The only difference this second time around was Francis died from the crash. Following this tragedy, Sammy Brown Jr. was charged with driving while intoxicated and also involuntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 12 months in prison.
12 months? Nigga, what? Y'all think 12 months is gonna teach him a lesson?
Nope.
You said what?
I said not at all. That is so effed up.
Rest in peace, bro.
Facts.
I be damn, this mother. You hit me twice, right? And then the second time you hit me, I died.
Yep.
I died. That is so fucked up, bro. All because, and then you drunk driving at that.
Facts.
Like, bro, go home, bro. Like, and you young. Makes no sense, man.
That's
Man,
it. Oh.
that ain't him.
Oh, that's it.
That's a different one.
Oh yeah, that's yeah.
They spelt it differently.
Yeah.
It's also that
Yeah,
time
so,
period.
yeah.
You might find obituaries and stuff like that. You might find something, but it's very rare you're gonna find, you know.
Yeah. Rest in peace to Francis.
Yeah.
On a Sunday night in early 1805, a 13-year-old boy named Émile Deschamps sat at a table full of adults in a house in Orléans, France. Now, Émile was supposed to be having dinner with all the other boys at his boarding school across the city, but his aunt had picked him up as a surprise for a home-cooked meal. And he knew why. His aunt was worried about him. So Émile's parents had sent him to this boarding school in Orléans a few years ago, but he hated the city, and basically right after he got there, his mother had died. And so Émile had really had a difficult time adjusting, and he felt lonely and isolated, and his aunt was definitely aware of that. And so tonight, Émile was very grateful that his aunt, because, she kind of felt bad for him, had brought him here to include him in this dinner, like he appreciated that. But this particular dinner was just full of adults that he didn't know, and it was just incredibly boring. In fact, right now, one of his aunt's middle-aged friends, this guy whose name was Monsieur Foncierbieu, was just rambling on and on about his experience in the military, and, Émile was just not remotely interested. I mean, this was not exciting to him in the least, and so he did what he always did, just sort of tune this guy out and let his mind wander. Because Émile had like this really big imagination, and he would routinely, especially when he was, lonely and sad at school, he would just kind of disappear into his own thoughts. But quickly, after he sort of began letting his mind wander, he was pulled right back to reality when his aunt set the dessert down right in the middle of the table. So this dessert was a brown, sauce-drenched cake-like thing that was actually wrapped in a cloth and was piping hot, literally steam coming off of it. And Émile, he just kind of stared at it because he had never seen a dessert like this before and had no idea what it was. And so as he was staring at it, he heard a voice at the table say, "Oh, it was plum pudding, and Émile, you should try this." Émile looked over at the voice who had said this, and it belonged to Monsieur de Fontainebleau, who was smiling at him. This is the guy who had been rambling about his military experience. And the Monsieur repeated that Émile really needed to try a slice of this plum pudding, because it was an amazing traditional English dessert, and it was just absolutely delicious. So Emil let his aunt cut him a slice, and then he took a bite. And he was glad he did, because it really was incredible. It was this rich and sweet and just perfectly warm dessert. I mean, this was like one of the best desserts he had ever had. And so after trying this plum pudding and, telling the monsieur how great it was and thanking his aunt, he just kind of went back to letting his mind wander, and the conversation at the table picked back up again, and, it was just boring adult talk, and the night just kind of continued as is. And then at some point in the night, when the meal and the dessert and everything had all been eaten up, the guests parted ways, and Emil went back to his boarding school. And quickly, when he got back to his boarding school, he forgot about the dinner and the pudding and the monsieur, and just carried on with his life. One afternoon, 10 years later, in the spring of 1815, Emil was 23 years old, and he was living in Paris, about 80 miles away from Orléans. So Emil had basically fled Orléans as soon as he was old enough to strike out on his own. And once he had turned his big imagination into a blossoming career. He was now a poet and a playwright, and he was writing about these big, sweeping human experiences like love and chaos and how mysterious life can be. So Emil that day had basically been writing nonstop and had sort of lost track of time and sort of forgot to eat. And then suddenly he felt super hungry, and so now here he was out and about looking for something to eat. But he was so hungry that he decided he didn't even care where he went. I mean, normally he was picky about where he would eat lunch and dinner, but today he just wanted food. He didn't care where it was. And so he just randomly chose a cafe and went inside. It was a small space with a few customers sitting at some tables, and Emil just walked in and took a seat at an empty one. And quickly thereafter, a waitress came over and handed Emil a menu, and when he flipped it open, he was immediately drawn to the dessert section. He saw this cafe served plum pudding, the amazing English dessert that he had had a decade earlier at that dinner party with his aunt and the monsieur. He had not had plum pudding from that day to now. It had been 10 years. He had just not had it, but he saw it on the menu, and he's like, oh my goodness, I gotta have plum pudding again. That was so good 10 years ago. I gotta have that experience again. And so Emil asked this waitress if he can have a slice of their plum pudding. And she just shook her head and said, I'm sorry, but the last piece we had, I actually just served it to the guy over there. Like, we don't have any more. And the waitress, she saw Emil react to this, and he was like so distraught. He's like, oh man, really? Like, there's no more? Are you serious? And the waitress could sense like he really, really wanted this plum pudding. And so she goes, well, hold on a minute. And she turns and she calls out to the gentleman that she had actually just given the last piece to, who was sitting in the corner of the cafe. And she calls to him and says, hey, would you mind sharing that last piece with this new guest here, with Emil? Because he wants a piece of this plum pudding. And so Emil, he kind of looks around the waitress in the direction of the person that she's speaking to, the guy with the actual plum pudding. And the guy who's sitting over there, he looks up, and wouldn't you know it, it's Monsieur de Fontainebleau, the same guy who was at the dinner party 10 years earlier, who encouraged Emil to eat plum pudding for the first time and only time in his whole life at that point. It's the same guy. Like, they're not even in Orléans, France. They're 80 miles away in Paris. And Emil, he's chosen a random cafe. He'd never been here before, and he just happened to see plum pudding on the menu. Like, what are the odds that it's the same guy and they're having plum pudding? Like, the coincidence here is just unbelievable. And so Emil, he sort of says to the waitress, hold on a minute, I know him. And so Emil, he gets up and walks over to the monsieur, and he sits down next to him, and they're both like, this is crazy, it's been 10 years, and here we are, eating plum pudding together again. Like, what are the odds? And so for the next 15 minutes or so, the two men just caught up about their respective lives. They ate this plum pudding. And then at the end of it, they were like, all right, like, great, nice to see ya. And they both just went their separate ways, with the monsieur going back to whatever he does and Emil going back to his writing. 38 years later, at 6 p.m. on a winter evening in 1853, Emil sat at a tea party in Paris, having a great time as he chatted with the other guests at his table. He'd been invited to this party by the hostess, who was a big admirer of his work. And there were actually a lot of people like that these days. Emil was now in his 60s, and he was very well known. He'd published tons of plays and poems and translations, and he was close friends with many of the literary giants of France and Europe. Like, he had made it as a creative. And so as Emile is sitting at this table, basically being lauded for, all of his achievements and what an incredible writer he was, as he's just sitting there basking in the glory, one of the hostess's staff came in with a platter of dessert. And Emile, he looked over and he saw what the dessert was, and right away he knew he had to have some.
Oh my gosh.
It was plum pudding. And so as the staff person came over with the plum pudding to give to Emile, he sort of laughed and told, the staff person and the people at his table the story of how, over the course of his life, he'd only had plum pudding 2 times, when he was 13 and when he was 23. And in both of those situations, when he had had plum pudding, this guy, Monsieur de Fontainebleau, had been present. This man that he didn't know and had only interacted with when he was eating plum pudding. And it was kind of like this crazy coincidence. He described seeing him 10 years later in Paris. He couldn't believe it. That was 38 years ago, but still it's like this wild coincidence, the biggest one of his whole life. And so he sort of jokingly told the people at the table and the staff, like, hey, here I am about to eat for the 3rd time plum pudding. We better be on the lookout for the monsieur. He's bound to show up. And everyone kind of laughed. They're like, yeah, that's crazy. And so Emile, he gets his plate of plum pudding, he gets his fork, and he scoops a bite, and he's about to eat it when the butler walks into the room and announces that there is going to be one more guest joining them at this tea party.
Oh gosh.
And who walks in, this additional guest? None other than Monsieur de Fontainebleau. And so Emile, he's about to bite the plum pudding, and he looks up and he sees him and he can't believe it. I mean, the guy is like 1,000 years old and he hasn't seen him for 38 years.
Right,
and the only other times are when he's eating plum pudding. And wouldn't you know it, for the 3rd time here, it's happening again. Like, this is unbelievable. It was crazy the 2nd time. This is now impossible. How is it that he's here as I'm about to eat for the 3rd time this plum pudding? It doesn't make sense. And so Emile just stared at the monsieur with this look of just absolute shock on his face. And the monsieur, as he walked in, he sort of stopped and scanned the room, and he eventually met eyes with Emile. And he had this look of just total confusion on his face. He's looking at Emile, he's seeing the plum pudding that he's eating, kind of, scoping out the whole room. And then the monsieur, he just turned around and he walked away. It would turn out Monsieur de Fontainebleau had been invited to another party on the same floor and had mistakenly wandered into Emile's party at the exact moment he was being served plum pudding for the 3rd time in his entire life.
Wow.
This was truly just an astounding set of coincidences over, a 50-year period. Like, the odds of this all happening exactly as it did those 3 different times he had plum pudding and there was the monsieur, for things to line up that way, it was just staggering to imagine how perfectly each coincidence had to line up. It was almost so much that Emile felt like, there's got to be something else going on here. Right? This can't just be coincidence. It was just like too much. And so in fact, Emile would go on to recount his plum pudding and the monsieur story many, many times to his friends in literary circles, and he would ultimately write about it in his eventual memoir. Today, it's been around 200 years since the plum pudding events took place. And during that time, Emile's account has been dissected countless times by probability experts and scientists and mathematicians from all around the world, and nobody has a good answer for how this could have happened. And so in the end, Emile's account about what happened to him actually ended up becoming the foundation for a very famous philosophical concept pioneered by Carl Jung called synchronicity. Synchronicity basically means that some coincidences might not actually be coincidences. They might not be random at all, but instead are actually connected to a much larger meaning or purpose, even if we don't know what that is.
Plum pudding.
All over some goddamn pudding. Plum pudding at that. Has anyone had plum pudding before? I
I looked up the ingredients.
It gives me fruitcake vibes. Like, looking at it, give me fruitcake vibes, but I doubt I eat some. I don't really eat plum, so I don't know. Plum ain't bad. It ain't my cup of tea. or spotted tea?
I'm done. I'm like, everything in it.
You consume
I mean,
for the most
you know
part.
how like you can like eat something. I'm like, hey, like if you take this out, would it change like the taste?
So
of
what you trying to say? Take the plum down?
and the raisins, because it said it got raisins in it.
Oh, it's Christmas pudding.
Is that what it's? So,
Mm.
but everything is like you can leave the carrots. They said it has this recipe has carrots in it. I don't know the original.
Carrots ain't bad in dessert,
No, I say you
though.
can leave the carrots. Like you can leave the carrots.
I say don't do too much of it though.
Yeah.
Don't do too much. The raisin part, I'm not jigging with the raisin part though.
Yeah, this what this one has. Like, cause looking at it on a picture, don't look too. I mean, it don't look appealing, but
Yeah.
the ingredients, I'm like, it may be good. And I don't know the texture, cause it look a little
moist. It look moist to me. It don't look gelatin like gelatin, but it's a little moist, more moist. I don't know.
I don't know, but if you ever had it, let me know what it is. Yeah.
Y'all spam us up in the comments, man. Let us
Please
know y'all
do.
thoughts in the comments for us down below. But until next time, y'all know how it go, man. I do go by the name DJ New Kid. This is
Here, Nicole.
We are.
Kid and
We are.
Go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my folks. Dollar, 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 dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar, 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 dollar. Let me watch out for my pocket.